to episode 162 of The Route. The Route is a glorified coffee chat and podcast form that takes you from A to B with a new guest every episode. I'm your host, Christopher Nascimento, and let's get started. Before we begin today's episode, just a couple things to cover as always. First, if you haven't already, subscribe to the podcast. It's available on Apple, Google, Spotify, Amazon, XYZ, 10 different platforms for audio. So wherever you listen to a podcast, we should be there. And then if you haven't already and you haven't known about this, we're also on YouTube. That's all underneath that. The username, the Routecast, so at the Routecast, if you want to find us on those channels. And once there, specifically with YouTube, follow us, like us on the other platforms, rate 5 stars, allows the podcast to grow a little bit easier. And that way you can find us on audio, video, all that good stuff. And with the new platform we're using now too, you should be able to find clips on places like YouTube and many other places as well. And as mentioned for YouTube, with the username at the Routecast, that's applicable to social media as well. So all the classics, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok as well. So that's where you'll be seeing the clips in short order. But more ideally for the people listening here, we're on LinkedIn underneath the Routecast. And that's where maybe you can start your network, grow your network, maintain it, connect with myself, connect with the guest, and maybe other like-minded people, and that can kind of be a great way to kind of go on from there. So check us out there, the Routecast, all platforms, especially LinkedIn. But with that now said, let's get into today's guest. Today's guest is brought to you by Zoom. In the world of partnerships, there's a simple principle: you adapt or you die. In this fast-paced industry, you can't afford to miss a beat, and that's where Zoom will help you win each and every time. Zoom provides premier real-time data insights for partnerships across broadcast, streaming, and social like no one else. They're always ready, and detailed analytics help you get the upper hand and save time in your day-to-day reporting. So, if you're ready to upgrade your reporting today, make the smart choice and choose Zoom. With that, today's guest. I'd now like to welcome someone who has some pretty impressive experience in regards to the analyzing field, from investments to assets to Olympic sport and now sports betting. I'm pleased to introduce to you Eric Gerson, sports trader at FanDuel. How's it going?
Hey Chris, thanks for having me on. Happy to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really excited to kind of get into it. Just as I mentioned there in the introduction, you have such a unique route, which is really what I'm looking for in regards to the guests I have on. Do you mind maybe let's just kicking it off, right? It's called the route. So where did your route begin and how to get to where we are today?
For sure. Yeah, I'm thinking mine might be a little bit shorter than I know some of the other guests that you've had on with 30 plus years of experience in the industry, but I'll try and keep it short and sweet. Yeah, I grew up in Toronto, just west end in Etobicoke, and just growing up, I always just had a liking towards numbers, math, and then also sports. Just played sports kind of growing up my entire life. So it was always kind of in the back of my head to try and maybe combine the two in some sort of career, but I knew it was pretty tough to kind of break in, so wanted to keep my options open. So um, when I was deciding what school to go to, there was I was looking at Laurentian, the SPAD program there, or sports business, sports management at Brock. Um, but I knew I kind of wanted to do something a bit more like a math background. And I remember, I think it was just around the time that I had watched The Big Short, the finance movie, which is a great movie. And so I was like, okay, finance could also be an option. So I ended up going to Waterloo for their financial math program there. And it was great. And the best thing about it was all the co-ops that you get through it. So you work for 4 months and then you go to school for 4 months back and forth. And then by the end of your undergrad, you've got 6 separate 4 month co-ops, so 2 years of work experience by the time you graduate. So that was a really big one. And my first few co-ops, they were in finance, and the stuff that we were doing was cool, and the companies that were cool, and all the people were great that I worked with. But I just never found that that dying passion that I could tell all my other coworkers had for it. Um, and so it was kind of like midway through my undergrad, I growing up, my family, we billeted hockey players for the Steelheads in the OHL. And so through kind of our connection there as being a billet family, I just was able to join their stat tracking team. So really it was just watching game tape and taking jotting down advanced stats for the Steelheads and then also kind of the other teams in the OHL. And that kind of really opened my eyes to the world of it was my first introduction to kind of hockey analytics per se. And then after that, my last co-op at Waterloo was with Canadian Tire. There it was kind of a very small team at Canadian Tire that works on sports analytics for Team Canada at the Olympics. And Hockey Canada and Canada Basketball, they have their own teams of sports analytics, right? But the smaller organizations like curling or alpine skiing, I think I was doing sports analytics for Nordic Combined, which is like ski jumping and cross country skiing. Like it's very, very more niche. So they kind of use a team at Canadian Tire to provide more insights to those smaller national sport organizations for Team Canada. And that was just a 4-month co-op. It was really, really interesting and again, kind of furthered my eyes into the world of sports analytics, I guess you could say. And another big one that I thought I'd mention is just throughout university, and one that I'd recommend to a lot of students who are trying to like break in, is going to conferences and all the clubs and all those types of things. That there's so many that specifically have to do with sports business, sports analytics. One of them in particular, two of them in particular, the John Molson Sports Business Conference at Concordia in Montreal. Been there now 3 years in a row, twice as a student, and then once actually just this year with FanDuel, and it's a great conference there. So shout out to them. And also the Sloan Sports Analytics Conference in Boston. It's in the States, but it's also really one if you're specifically interested in kind of the math behind sports. I was able to attend that in my last year of university, and it introduced me to a lot there. Yeah, and then when I graduated university in April 2022, that was also when online sports betting became legalized in Canada, so it was kind of just like a perfect storm there. And FanDuel was hiring, especially since they were entering the Canadian market. Hockey's big here. So they were looking for a new sports trader to help out on their hockey offering. And honestly, I just saw the posting on LinkedIn, just like any other posting, and tossed my name in the hat. Definitely got a little bit lucky on the way, but joined in January 2023, so it's been just over a year now. And it's been great, been loving it. And yeah, there's my hopefully short but sweet intro to kind of where I got to as of this point.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. And to be honest, that's exactly what the route is about. Just kind of sharing those pathways to where you are now. And as always, there's so much to get into just as soon as we started. As I maybe mentioned on so many different episodes in the past, I like to work from the beginning and get to where we are now. So I guess going back to what you mentioned there just in regards to your route, you've always kind of had an interest in, let's say, sports, the business, the analytics side of things. Did you ever maybe have a moment where you never saw yourself within that space or any spaces within, those categories? Like, did you ever think at one point, hey, maybe I'll be a cook, maybe I'll be a race car driver? Did that ever come about for you?
I think at one point, I think when I was, so generally for the most part, it's kind of been, I wouldn't say tunnel vision, but just, those are kind of things that I've been good at, so I kind of just assumed maybe I would end up there. And also it was kind of stuff that I was around, a lot of my friends' parents were kind of in those industries as well, whether it be finance or mostly finance type things. So it was easier to envision myself in that area. But I remember one time kind of midway through university where I wasn't, enjoying the finance aspect as much, and sports seemed like such a long shot, right? So I was just thinking about other options, and I think, I really liked analyzing situations, and I think at one point I was searching up like how to become like a criminal investigator, like a policeman or like something like that, police investigator or something like that, where it was just, again, it was more like analyzing problems, but in a totally different setting. I think that was maybe for like a week or two when I was kind of really just out there trying to see what other options I had. But then I think that was around the time where I ended up getting that co-op at Canadian Tire in sports analytics, and it was kind of, first full paid role type thing in sports. So I think that kind of put those put those thoughts to the side, and then kind of got me back on the sports analytics track.
For sure. And I guess then going back to that too, um, for that decision to decide on when you're going to school, I know maybe when I started the podcast initially, our audience base was a bit younger, whereas a lot of people maybe starting school or in university.
Hmm.
Now it's kind of spread out evenly where it's, you know, students, new grads, established people, then people that have been in the space for, quite some time. So let's say touching on those that are, starting school or within school now, how did you make that decision? I know you were looking at, sport management programs. You then went to Waterloo. Did you have maybe a realization where like, hey, the degree that I would get at Waterloo would be a bit more applicable or broad to an extent in regards to maybe a sport management one where you could maybe force yourself into a corner if you look at it that way.
Yeah, 100%. You kind of nailed it right there. Kind of when I was considering the sports management programs, it was more so the thought in my head. And don't get me wrong, they're really good programs, and a lot of the people that I work with, I know Alana was on your podcast a little bit ago, and she went to SPAD at Laurentian, and our head of our FanDuel Canada business went to Laurentian. So it's a great program, but just when I was kind of considering, whether to do a sports specific degree or more of just a general one, I think that was right around the time that sports analytics was really taking off, with, teams were really, NHL teams, any team was just really investing into their analytics team. And so kind of in my head, it was like, okay, if I go to a sports management program and sports doesn't work out, it might be a bit tougher to get, a finance job or something like that, or, a different career, I guess you could say. Whereas if I went to financial math, it was kind of like math and business at Waterloo. You still have the option of getting into sports because if you have an analytical background, you could do stuff on the side like, hackathons and that type of thing to really kind of maybe enter that sports field. And then if the sports doesn't work out, you have a pretty, well-regarded degree from Waterloo in math and business that you can take to really a lot of different types of careers. So I think, like you said, it was more so keeping my options open, but still working on those analytical, mathematical skills, whatever you want to call it, that in my mind still could be useful to, at the time, it was tunnel vision, work for the lease type thing, right? But as we know, that's not, there's a lot more different roles in sports than just working for a team. And yeah, so it was more so just kind of keeping my options open.
No, that makes a ton of sense. And I guess kind of going back to that too, like obviously I think that degree is really good if you know exactly what you want to do. I think just in regards to what you were saying about maybe more the angle that you were looking at it from, let's say the stats or the math point of view, that's where maybe that degree would have been a little bit difficult in regards to you personally.
Yeah,
Then I guess kind
exactly.
of looking at that a bit further, you touch on the co-op a lot, right? And maybe how
Hmm.
those experiences definitely landed you to where you are today. Um, Sorry, do you mind maybe explaining the balance between taking on the co-ops? Because obviously, like even in my role now, I chat with co-ops at work and they explain to me how it works. And to the extent sometimes very beneficial, other times they kind of force you into a role, depending how you look into it. But then
Hmm.
also in regards to your connection with the steelheads, I'm assuming that came just from your personal connection. So there's that balancing act of co-op and then also just what you were able to do networking. How did you manage that? Because I'm sure that's a difficult field to do for most people.
Yeah, for sure. I think, I mean, I might be biased just because I went to Waterloo, and both my brothers actually go to Waterloo right now, and they're both in engineering and having some really cool jobs in using the co-op program. But I think, yeah, like you said, it was a mix of kind of personal connections, and also the beauty of co-op is that, not everyone a lot of students might not have those networks that other students do. But the thing with co-op is that it kind of levels the playing field for everyone, and it brings all the companies to Waterloo, and they're not worried about who you know or anything like that, and it's more so, do you have the right skills for the job type thing, and I think that's a really big one. The thing with the steelheads was that it was just a volunteer position, just doing it on my own time throughout the week type thing. But because I had that on my list of past roles, that was in third year, I think, that I did that. When I was applying for co-op in my fourth year, it was my last co-op. The fact that I had that on my resume was one of the main talking points in the reason that I got the co-op with Canadian Tire on their sports analytics team. So it was just another big one that I stressed too, because I know, like you said, a lot of people watching this podcast are either students or people trying to break into the industry. A big one that I've said is, because it is a competitive industry, sometimes you kind of have to do something. I'm not gonna, let's say, for free, because hopefully you enjoy it. So it's like time, it's time well spent. But I really enjoyed doing the stat tracking, just kind of learning how an OHL team works, and so I was doing that kind of on my own time. But because I was doing that on my own time, it helped me end up getting a paid co-op position with Canadian Tire. And again, doing those conferences, and even just maybe if you are analytically minded, maybe working on your own fantasy hockey model or something like that, or a sports betting model if you're really into that, or just doing something on your own that you can kind of show companies when you're applying for a job, okay, I like it this much that I was doing this stuff on my own type thing. So I know I kind of took that question in one direction, but that's kind of what my thoughts there.
No, I think that's a perfect way to kind of go about it, right? Where I think you touched on it, and it made a ton of sense just in regards to how that balancing act then did work, right? In regards to, you know, going from, doing the co-ops, but then also then how that volunteering, or how that, your personal connections and that work that you got from that helped you then land a co-op as well, right? So I think that's kind of a perfect way to
Mhm.
go about it. To be honest, same type of thing for me when I first wanted to get into sports and how I broke into it, in my previous roles. That's how it went about, right? I was saying, hey, like, I'm available, I'm willing to do the work, and that's how I kind of broke into to that specific career at that point in time. But then going back to, let's say, maybe more marketing or sales type of roles, it was then leveraging some things that I did on my personal time, whether it's, this podcast, different brands and
Yeah.
different things like that I worked on. But I definitely see where you're coming.
160 episodes, pretty good. You like, that's a good run you've been on.
Yeah, yeah. There's been some pauses here and there just in regards to if I want to be, let's say, the next Joe Rogan or something. Obviously, that's not what it is, but it's more so just finding, conversations that I want to have, or people that I want to meet with, and just trying to find something that's sustainable for the long term. And I think that's something that should definitely come about with this podcast now, with how we have it formatted. But yeah, and I guess going
100%.
back to, yeah, going to your route again more specifically, how would you then kind of go about in regards to, landing, let's say, these roles after university? And I guess before we get into that specifically, one of the key things I noticed you were touching on was just in regards to, networking, right? You're touching on those different conferences, and I'm assuming that definitely played a huge advantage just in regards to the people you met. How then maybe even, let's say, for that Canadian Tire role, I know you were saying, it was a co-op, but I'm sure you then met some people, you had experience with the Steelheads, or maybe then your personal work then kind of spoke for itself as well, right?
Yeah, 100%. So yeah, when I've talked to, now that I've been at the company for a year with FanDuel, every now and then I'll have conversations, especially when we're hiring new people. I'll ask one of the guys that I work with, who was kind of the person who hired me, what did I do, or that type of thing, just to kind of learn, what maybe made my application stand out, or that type of thing. So a big one that I've kind of noticed is that it kind of felt like a few step process, where I was able to just volunteer my time to the Steelheads because it was something I was interested in. That in itself helped me attain that role with Canadian Tire, doing sports analytics just as a co-op. And then one of the big things, I think, that helped my application stand out with FanDuel was I had the hockey background and I had the math background, which a lot of people did, but then the fact that I had kind of worked on Olympic sports was a bit of a niche um, for me in that sense because FanDuel does offer odds on the Olympics and they're coming up in Paris, this summer. So that was something in the back of their minds when they were going through my application. Okay, when we have those, the crazy build up and then those, 2 weeks or of the Olympics, it's a big time for the sports book. And if we have someone who's done, worked on Olympics before, because it is a pretty niche thing, that could help. So I guess what I'm saying there, you never really know what little things on your resume might stand out to the person looking at it. Um, and then the other part that you mentioned about maybe going to these conferences and meeting someone that might help you later down the line. So it was funny, John Molson the John Molson conference, or I guess, how about let's start with Sloan because that was in March of, actually, this year's version of the conference just happened this past weekend. So rewind 2 years ago, this time 2 years ago. I went and that was when I was still in my last year of university, didn't really know what I was doing afterwards. I went to a FanDuel workshop with actually two of the three people who gave this workshop I now work very closely with. So it was kind of like a cool full circle moment. And they were just kind of going into how they price NFL field goals, let's say, or set the odds for any kicker to make a field goal. And then I didn't meet them because there was hundreds of people in the room or anything like that. But the fact that then when I wrote my cover letter for the job, I was able to be like, okay, in 2022, I went to Sloan and listened to, so and so talk about how they price field goals for FanDuel, and it was really interesting. Like the fact that you can say that in the cover letter, I think really, really stands out in that sense. And then also when I was at John Molson, the conference through Concordia, this was November 2022, I guess. So I was in the application process for the sports trader role to start in January 2023. I didn't even know it when I went to the conference at the time, but Dale Hooper, who's our head of FanDuel Canada, the Laurentian grad, he was speaking at the conference, and so I went up to him after his talk, and definitely was leaning into it like, "Hi, I'm Eric. I'm applying to the role type, the sports trader role." I don't know if he took that back with him or anything like that, but I'm ended up getting the role, so I think it definitely didn't hurt, I guess, for me being there, and hopefully making that connection there. So yeah, I think you just really never know the people that you're going to run into or the people that you're going to see at these conferences. So just putting yourself out there is really beneficial in that sense.
Yeah, no, I think that's pretty cool. Like almost a full circle moment to an extent, right? Just in regards to how, let's say, something you did as a student then help land you like a full time gig. So that's pretty cool. There's two
Mhm.
things that you touched on there that I'd love to dive into further before we get into your time now at FanDuel. Um, the first one, or the first two things, I'll ask you at the same time, and you can decide how you want to answer it, or if you can answer one of them. You mentioned there
Yeah.
the aspect of pricing field goals. I don't know if that's something you're able to share, but if it is, I'd be curious in regards to how that works. Because obviously, it's a cool niche thing that not everyone knows how it works. But then also just
Mhm.
then into regards to diving into that Canadian Tire role a bit more specifically, because I think that's something you were touching on as well on how that then helped land the FanDuel job for you. I'm curious about what
Yeah.
it was like a bit further as well.
Yeah, for sure. Unfortunately, I don't work on the NFL team as much. So trust me, I don't know if FanDuel would want me working on the NFL team because I don't follow the sport as much as I do hockey. But I can definitely dive into kind of yeah what I was doing at Canadian Tire and how that just really helped my skills in terms of it was very an analytical based role, so it was a lot of just really it was a lot of coding in Python all day, which honestly, when you're working with sports data, it's pretty fun. Rather than there's a lot of other data that you can be working with that isn't as fun as sports data. So um, a lot of the job was just scraping data and seeing kind of past results for, let's say I was working on Nordic Combined, which is one of the ones that I was doing, which is a combination of ski jumping and cross-country skiing. So the competitors will compete in ski jumping and then they'll compete in cross-country skiing, and it's kind of the overall winner takes the gold in that sense. But essentially what we do is we'd go back and find the results from World Cups and kind of other competitions that they do throughout the year. World Cups, World Championships, there's other smaller tournaments. And then essentially so the hardest part is probably honestly getting all the data into like a nice format on your end. And then after that, once you have it all, building mostly just a lot of like simple linear regression models in Python to try and be like, okay, based on their performance in the past in these World Cups, how do we predict they're going to do at the upcoming Olympics? And this was for Beijing, the upcoming Beijing Olympics when I did that. And then probably what the team is doing right now is doing the same stuff, but for Paris and on summer sports, so swimming and track and field and that type of stuff. So it was really cool because it really improved my coding abilities because that's what we were doing all day, just really making models in Python. And so I have that role to thank for basically improving my coding skills a ton.
Yeah, and sorry for asking the question about the field goals. I thought maybe something, since it was shared at a conference, that maybe it was able to kind of be shared. But I guess then getting to your role a bit more specifically at FanDuel now, what does the day-to-day kind of look like? What types of things you can work on? And whatever you can share in regards to that sense, I'd love to kind of learn more. And I'm sure the guests will, or not the guests, the listeners will be interested to learn more about that as well.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So I guess in the sense of sports trading at FanDuel, it's just, if I were to explain in one word, it's we're kind of responsible for the market creation, market management, and then the settling of the market. So the full life cycle of, if you see Leafs money line up on site, we're putting that up, managing it throughout until puck drop, then live trading it while the game's going on, and then at the end of the game, if the Leafs win, we're settling that as a win, or if they lose, we're settling it as an L. And that's basically, obviously there's a lot more intricacies that go into it, but kind of the few things that go into it is you obviously need to be a big part, honestly, is following the news, because if, as any sports fan would know, and I don't know, what's your favorite sport, Chris? Are you kind of more of a hockey guy, or what sport do you follow the most?
The Senators, unfortunately, I love the Sens, and they break my heart.
Oh, the
Yeah.
Sens. Well, at least you guys are getting a new rink now, right? Yeah,
Nah,
I think
that's not
they're
even
building
confirmed.
it.
That's the worst part about it, right? Like, who
Oh,
knows?
really?
Everything's up
Oh,
in the
I
air
thought.
with this team now.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Let's say the Sens are playing, and the reporter for the Sens announces that at the morning skate at 11 a.m. Let's say Brady Tkachuk and Josh Norris are both out of the lineup when maybe the lines that were set before that we're assuming that they were in. Obviously, that's going to change the Sens' probability of winning by a bit, right? And that's up to us to kind of be on the pulse in that sense, to be ahead of those market moves. And then it's also a lot of just the same way that um, yeah, and then it's also just like following the market prices and making sure, okay, if we're pretty off market from this price, is there a reason why? And just kind of that. So like I said, it's coming to that price in the beginning when we're going up with it, trying to get to the true price as quickly as we can, um, and then basically managing it throughout the duration that it's up for, and then making sure it goes live correctly, and then settling it at the end. So and that's just for hockey, but what's really cool at FanDuel is that we kind of have teams that are all um, maybe they specialize in each of the certain sports. So while I'm on the NHL and hockey team, we have an NBA team, we have an NFL team, and they kind of do that for those sports. So it's cool. You're kind of in the weeds of the NHL markets all day, and it's if you're a hockey fan, it's a fun job.
Yeah, and I don't know if this didn't come off the right way, but I mean it. So it's almost like you get to do like the cool elements of being a sports fan as a job, right? Where, let's say when I'm at work or at lunchtime, I'll then go check Twitter, see what's the news in the NHL world, and I'll try to stay up to date to it. Whereas, that's your job, and then obviously then you have to go do like building the models and pricing things on the back end of it. But it's kind of cool where you kind of just hear about how it works and just staying up to date to that stuff. And maybe I can beat you in regards to finding the news about it so that I can maybe get a good odds prior to you seeing it. But that's pretty cool in regards to how it works. And then I guess going on from there, that's kind of where you're currently at now. And what I typically like doing when we kind of go through everyone's route is two specific questions. I like to ask people to kind of wrap everything up and put a nice bow on it. So the first being, since we've been through your route, we've heard what you've been able to do so far to date. I've said this for 162. This is going to be my 162nd time saying this on this podcast. I'm going to live until I'm 103. I'm going to be on a rocking chair thinking about all the cool things I've been able to do in my life, but for this example, specifically my career, right? And then when I'm on that rocking chair, I'm sure there's going to be moments that are going to stand out to me, right, where I'm 103 and I'm still going to remember that. So if I put Eric in the same scenario, you're 103, on a rocking chair, thinking about all the cool things you did in your career so far, what's maybe one moment that you're certain you're going to remember at that age where you're like, wow, I can't believe I got to do that for work?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think one thing that was really cool that we've done is for the it was really cool just kind of being a part of pricing all the markets for the NHL All-Star in Toronto, because that was in our hometown. Our office is right in downtown Toronto, and just kind of the city was alive, just because hockey, or Toronto is kind of the mecca of or the biggest city, just everyone lives and breathes hockey here, right? So just kind of being really, really into the weeds of that, and pricing up every market imaginable, and then we were able to catch a couple of the games as well. So just kind of like seeing our work kind of come to life, just in the arena right next to where we priced it all up. That was really interesting. And then also a cool thing that we get to do, because Ontario. So I guess that's more of a sports highlight, I guess you could say. My highlight will be when the Leafs win the Stanley Cup. I feel like that'll be the highlight eventually, but I don't think that's ever
I don't think
happened.
that'll happen,
But
so I think we'll stick to the NHL All-Star. No, sorry, continue.
yeah, exactly. And then I think another thing is, because Ontario is pretty fresh to the online sports betting space. I think a big one is, the rules or the regulations here are a little bit more relaxed than, let's say, in New York or a lot of the states. So what's really cool is that we get to offer some pretty interesting novelty markets. So I think one of the highlights is when all that Otani news was coming out. Oh, he's on the plane to Toronto and all that. We were the team managing. We had a Otani next team market up, where you could, place a bet on if you think he's going to the Dodgers, the Jays, or some of the other teams in the mix. And just managing that market the day of all that craziness and all the tweets was pretty wild. So I think that was another cool highlight of the job so far.
Yeah, that's very cool just in regards to, working on things like that. And I know even yesterday, I think I got a FanDuel ad for when the patios will first open in
Yeah,
Toronto
yeah.
or Ontario as a whole. I forget what it was, but I was sending that to my buddies, and I thought it was the funniest thing where, like, it's just kind of cool things like that where it just makes it fun, right, throughout the week at work or something. So that's pretty interesting that you get to work on that. And then the last question I now have is, we went into the future. Eric was 103 years old. Now let's go back to when you're 16, 17, 18. You're about to walk on the Waterloo campus for the first time, or maybe you're deciding to attend, university for mathematics or sports, right? Um, if you could go back in time and speak with that younger version of yourself, what's one piece of advice that you've learned so far? And you'd be like, hey, little Eric, this is something that I think is pretty cool that you should know, because I think it's gonna be very monumental for you.
Yeah, some good advice that I'd give kind of a younger self would be, and I'm sure probably everyone on the a lot of people who have come on this podcast has probably said the same thing, where it's just like kind of take anything that's thrown your way and just like get used to just saying yes to a lot of things, I think, like, and not being afraid to kind of like try something, because like I said, you never really know, well, like who you're going to meet in that sense, and I think that's one of the most important things, or what you're going to learn. And a perfect example is that um, Sloan Sports Analytics Conference. I kind of just went down to Boston on my own by myself, and I hadn't really even traveled on my own before, type thing. And I said, screw it. It was a bit of an investment, but went down just for the weekend. Um, and I ended up going to that talk with FanDuel and participating in a hackathon where I met a few people there. And I'd say if I probably didn't go to that one or the John Molson conference, I'm not sure if I'd I'd have the position that I do now. So I think just in general, it's if if you're really interested in like trying to maybe break into a certain industry, just putting yourself out there and is really important, because you kind of never really know what's going to happen. For all I know, maybe I, you know, spent the money and spent my time to go down to this conference and nothing came out of it, but I would have never known had I not gone, right? So I think just yeah, just kind of being very open-minded in that sense, and then also when you're in your roles that you do end up getting, um, just saying yes to a lot of things and being that person that people know that they can kind of like rely on to get something done, because then in the future they'll keep going back to you with more stuff, and then as you kind of progress, they'll be more advanced and more maybe bigger projects that you're taking on, and that's also just a pretty good way to progress your career in that sense. So that's kind of the advice I'd have for young Eric.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. And to be honest, it sounds like your trip down for the Sloan conference. I did something similar for my, let's say, first sports networking event. It was in Toronto, and
Mhm.
I was previously in accounting, and I've said this story a few times, so people listen to every episode. I was like, oh, I got to make almost like an investment of it, because if it's in Ottawa, if I'm too comfortable, different things like that, I maybe won't take as much out of it. Whereas I'm going to Toronto specifically for this. So I got a new suit. I'm turning into a big boy, let's say, at the time. And I wanted to really make an impression. So, I went up to the first few people and I was very scared and all that. But it really was like a huge eye opening moment where I almost felt like I grew up just doing that when I was 20, 22, however old I was at the time, where it was like, hey, like now it's the time to maybe switch from being a student to being, let's say a professional now, where how do you interact with these new people? And I think taking that investment of, paying for the train, getting the hotel, having that new suit, it really made me almost like change, and just saying yes and doing things and putting yourself out there, I think is a great way to end the podcast. And Eric, it was
Mhm.
great having you on the route and hearing your story, and I'm glad we got to do it so far. And yeah, unless there's anything else you'd like to share, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks a lot, Chris. And yeah, I totally agree with kind of the point that you had there. Like that was basically my experience with the Boston trip, and just kind of putting yourself out there in that sense. So yeah, thanks a ton for having me on. It's a really cool thing you got going here, and pleasure to be a part of it.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate that. And yeah, that's it for episode 162. And tune in to next week's episode. Thank you.